crap. You don't have the model going. What a freaking F up. Hold on. Hold on, loading. Oh, there it is. There I am. What's up? What's up? What's up? With this. Get rid of that. Alright. Let's do this. I'm excited. I've been waiting to watch this video because I wanted to do it on stream. It looks very promising. Have not watched it at all. I'm absolutely certain it's going to be good though. Let's get right into it. You'll discover what it is by this time.
What was the first historical reference to astrology?
Oh, got the music on
It
still.
was the Epic of Gilgamesh. And it was almost identical to the Western astrology we have today. So who started this? As it does. What was the first historical reference to astrology? It was the Epic of Gilgamesh. And it was almost identical to the Western astrology we have today. So who started this? As it does seem like remarkably accurate on so many levels, right? Numerology can be like crazy accurate. And so when you start digging into it, you're like, who established all this stuff? The 52 card playing deck even, right? Where did all this stuff come from? You're going to find that literally all of it, this esoteric wisdom that seems to have withstood the passage of time, all came through Hermes Trismegistus.
Robert Grant is the polymath Renaissance man who has been decoding some of the ancient secrets that have been hidden and encrypted in so much of our art, so much of our text. And what I really wanted to do for this podcast was bring him on to discuss Hermetic wisdom. I recently devoured this book called the Kabbalion, which is teaching Hermetic wisdom that comes, if you believe the myth, all the way back from the time of Abraham and is filtered through Egyptian and Roman and Greek culture, gone underground and then resurfaced. And there's incredible value in these codes, these 7 codes of Hermetic wisdom and all of the different laws and understandings in between. So in this podcast, we just dive right in, and it's one of the most interesting fields of philosophy, spirituality that I've ever encountered, and I'm really excited to share the principles of Hermetic wisdom with Robert Grant on this podcast. So enjoy this show with Robert Grant. The truth is that we're all the master, we're all the healer, we're all the mystic.
Give it up one time for Aubrey Marcus.
Robert, you're back.
Good to see you.
And I called you back for a very specific reason, because after we finished our last meeting, I read this book called the Kabbalion, and it was first published, I think, in 1906, and it was the resurfacing of some what they claim to be mystery school wisdom from Hermes Trismegistus that resurfaced in 1906 and then resurfaced again in the reprinting. And someone recommended it to me. It was actually my brother McCod, and I was like, oh shit. Like, a lot of this I'd heard, and I'd found myself quoting Hermes Trismegistus, but didn't really know the source material from where it came from. And this is something that you know a lot about, so I was like, man, we got to get back here and we got to talk about it. And where I want to start is who was Hermes?
Well, that's a big question. I think he's probably had many characters through what we would consider our history, through different incarnations. And, you know, a lot of people talk about Enoch, right, being related to Hermes. A lot
Who's
of people.
Enoch?
Okay, so we're going deep now.
Let's go. Yeah, why not?
Okay,
Fuck
so
it.
there's a non-canonical books of the Bible, right? And one of them is called the Book of Enoch. So Enoch tells a story of an antediluvian or pre-diluvian, pre-flood period of time. So like in the period.
And where are these books found? Like where are these non-biblical books found?
You know, so in 325 A.D.
Council of Nicaea.
Council of Nicaea, exactly. So Constantine, who was also the emperor of Rome at the time, decided to declare himself the pope. And now, if you can't beat him, the Christians at the time, let's join him. So let's set the rules for it. We're going to bring together all the bishops and everything, and they looked at it as this is a big spiritual awakening, but we need to make, the official sort of statement on these are the books of the Bible. Until that time, there were many, many other books. A lot of books didn't make it into this canonization.
Yeah. But where did they go?
They're still around. They're still around. The Gospel of Thomas is another good example of this. Some of them are called the Apocrypha, if you've ever heard of the Apocrypha. So these are like esoteric wisdom teachings that often the Essenes or the Gnostics also held and kept, and for literally thousands of years. So basically, what you find even in Qumran when they had the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? References were made inside of those and the Dead Sea Scrolls to some of these non-canonized books of the Bible.
And when you think about the Council of Nicaea, you have to think about an imperial structure that saw that the slave classes loved this new teaching, both for its virtue. Of course, there's so much virtue in the truth of Christianity and the teachings of Yeshua when you can actually look through some of the ways in which the, quote, church has twisted those teachings. But if you looked at the deep core of it, such powerful wisdom, number one. Number two, it started to flip and reverse the power structure because there was just a few wealthy aristocrats and there was tons and tons of poor peasants, proletariat, whatever you wanted to call them. And this religion started to flourish amongst them. Blessed are the meek. It kind of flipped everything on its head, and it was all about the virtue of your inner world, of your heart, of your compassion, of your kindness, of your love, of your service, not the strength of your arm and your armor and your conquering.
Yeah.
And so it flipped this whole Roman paradigm on its head. So you got an emperor there who's organizing a council and being like, we got to take all these texts and we got to make them work for us. And that alone should give people a little bit of a question about what's in the Bible.
That's right. This doesn't agree with my policies, so this is not going in the Bible.
It would be like if the current government was like, all these spiritual teachings, we got to take what we want and we got to eliminate the rest and say that we're spiritual, right? Like, why would you trust them?
Exactly.
To make the cuts. They're not the right editor. They got a vested interest. They're not unbiased
in fact,
source.
Arguably the opposite, right?
Yeah.
The one that you should be most skeptical of. Well, the Book of Enoch is one of those such books, and you can find tons and tons of references to this all across the internet. You can just type in Book of Enoch. You'll find a bunch of stuff, both from, even rabbinical kind of students and even rabbis themselves who will talk about this, but also in Kabbalah, but also across Christianity and everything. So this is kind of well known. In the Book of Enoch, tells a story about Enoch. Now, Enoch was a man who became godlike, okay? And he built a city, and this city, the city of Enoch, became so holy that it transcended this dimension, as it's described in this book. And
so it was the kingdom.
It was like a kingdom, right? It would be kind of
or
comparable,
the kingdom, like the way
maybe
that,
like a Shambhala,
yeah,
right? Maybe like a Shambhala, like a spiritual domain, and so he sort of transcended the.
Hold up. Oh, crap. Okay. That was very stupid of me. I ran right into the South Shore. So, we're gonna do a lot of Enoch talk, I guess, in the beginning of this. If you haven't gathered, this is entire video, 2.5 hours long. It's about, as they put it, deciphering the principles of Hermeticism. And Hermeticism is kind of like, well, as they pointed out, like the root of a lot of religious teachings and whatnot. But one of the philosophical teachings that finds itself most directly associated with Hermes Trismegistus, and aka Hermeticism, is alchemy, what is commonly described in the modern day as a kind of pre-chemistry, a primitive take at what has become modern day chemistry, and that's completely wrong. alchemy was a spiritual process. Now they ascribed the manipulation of materials as something they believed that was possible as an external representation of the spiritual practices that they were, researching and trying to undergo. But what is this? A freaking... This looks like a bot thing. Hello, welcome to the chat. We're doing philosophy and old school WoW today, which hopefully people agree is a pretty unique combo. Right now we're doing a video for Hermes Trismegistus, who set up Medicism, like way back in ancient Egypt times, which is kind of the foundation for alchemy, which was I was just getting into. Like I was saying, it's a even though it's looked at as a primitive take on chemistry, it was actually a spiritual practice. It was based heavily in this. But I'll let them keep going into it. Right now, we're kind of hitting the side tangent of the Book of Enoch, because they're trying to make the point that even a lot of pre-religious stuff is tied pretty deeply to these same concepts. But we'll see.
These things. Now, a lot of people, myself included, believe that Enoch came back in several incarnations, right? And this was Hermes Trismegistus, also referred to in the Egyptian pantheon as Thoth, right? Also pronounced thought, just like a thought inside your head. Mm-hmm. In addition, you have other references where it might be that Melchizedek was also one of these incarnations. So you've heard of the keys of Melchizedek.
That's who Paul Selig, who's been on my podcast many times, if he's forced and pressed, is give a name to the guides that he's talking to. It's Melchizedek.
Yeah, and Melchizedek means Malchizedek, right? It's a Hebrew word. You probably know that Jerusalem, right, is like peace, right? Salem, right?
Shalom.
So it's like shalom, right? It's like peace be with you, kind of a concept, the way we say shalom. Mm-hmm. And Jerusalem, and when you talk about Abraham paid tithes to the chief priest at the time, and he went to visit him, which lived in Salem, and his name was Malchizedek. And Malchi means king, right? Mm-hmm. Like Melech, or even the name Malek in Indian, right? The Hindu means king also. So there's like ancient stuff through etymology that's gone all over the place. Tzedek also can mean like justice or peace. So
King of Peace.
Yeah, like a king of peace and justice in a way. Say it like that. So basically, you have this personage who is reincarnated through time and always brought with that incarnation lots of wisdom.
So now, when we say incarnation, some people can have a very literal, linear way that you look at this, right? But fundamentally, but you can have your own unique body and your own unique configuration. Of course you do. You have different flesh and different things. You could even be a different, potentially, iteration of something, but actually tap into the current and the frequency, because in those non-physical dimensions, as I understand them through all of my journeys and through all of my studies, things are recorded in vibrations, and these vibrations you have the ability to access. So like Paul Selig can access the vibration of Melchizedek and allow that vibration to channel through, right? So there's a lot of ways that when we say incarnation, it doesn't mean like I was fucking Marcus Aurelius in a past life or something.
Although you would have made a very good Marcus Aurelius.
Thanks, Robert.
I could see you in that
It's an
breastplate.
unnecessary compliment, but I will accept. I will fucking accept. But nonetheless, like so when you think about this, just think about somebody who's tapping into, at the very least, the energy of what the vibrational signature and collected intelligence of this being that we call Hermes might be.
And that could very well be the case too. But there are certain signatures, and throughout Scripture, we see references to people getting keys, right? We've all heard about the keys of Peter, the keys of Melchizedek, right? The keys of Enoch. There's a book called The Keys of Enoch as well by J.J. Hurtak that's worth reading if you're interested to learn more about this. And I remember when we first met via text, I think I asked you if you were into Hermeticism the very first time as well, and you hadn't yet read Kybalion. And then when we talked at the last time, you're like, I just read Kybalion. It was like, whoa.
Yeah.
That was like, wow. And I feel like there is this frequency, maybe it's a frequency connection, it might be an incarnation connection, that ties several of these people throughout history together, right? Where we see these kind of keys of Solomon, another man of great wisdom who I know you've studied a lot about as well. So, and they all have sigils as well, which is kind of interesting. So there's kind of a different meaning.
I think I'm wearing David's sigil on my...
Yeah, you've got Star of David, which
my,
also originates
necklace.
with, as well, with that turned into Seal of Solomon as well. So I think there's some depth to this. And this concept of, even as recently as someone like Saint Germain, right? You may have heard of Saint Germain.
The
Saint
violet,
Germain,
the violet purple flame.
exactly.
of
So Saint Germain was this very interesting character from like the 18th century that everyone thought lived for possibly hundreds of years even. He was very charismatic. He could hold a conversation, but he never ate at dinner. He was always...
Maybe that's what.
So, well, touch on this real quick. So, apparently, the just academically accepted explanation for Saint Germain is that he was a moniker that was taken up by multiple writers, because he has like a lot of written works that span like a pretty substantial amount of time, and he never, he always claims to be the same person, but he doesn't make like, a whole lot of doesn't give a lot of detail to try to explain how he could possibly live so long, or doesn't really address any detractors to his claim of being the same person. Oh my god, are we still gonna deal with this right now? This is crazy. I'm so far away from her. You've got to be shitting me right now. Dude, could you just for the love of Jesus, let me off the hook this once? That's like 3 deaths just for being close to South Shore. Jesus. Anyway, Christ. So, yeah, Saint Germain, like they said, 1800s, wrote a lot of stuff, really impactful philosopher, and supposedly it's a moniker taken up by multiple people over the course of his prescribed lifespan.
Why he looks so old.
And he was, well, he never aged, though. That's the thing.
Yeah.
He didn't age, and that's what people claim about him. And he was, you'll find him throughout history, like involved in things like the American Revolution. He's like showing up in different places. It's like, how could he have been at all these different places?
Like the movie Highlander.
Exactly. He's like the movie Highlander. And this guy's really interesting because he speaks many languages, right? He's extremely charismatic. And people thought he must be a charlatan because he couldn't possibly have done all the things that he seems to have known and done in his lifetime.
Yeah.
Because he
There's a lot
had
of debate on
many
this.
lifetimes. So there's all kinds of huge lore around this guy.
I
A lot
really
of people
can't debate
believe
anymore.
that, again, tapping into that same frequency or possibly incarnation of Thoth, of Hermes.
Also, that traces potentially all the way to Saint Germain, is what you're saying. It could
Yes.
be, so it could go Enoch, it could go, Thoth, it could go
Melchizedek.
Hermes, Melchizedek,
Solomon.
Hermes, all of these different characters in a different iteration, articulation. And one of the teachings of Solomon and the teachings of like the deep mystical Kabbalah and Torah is that we all have the potential to actually merge our own will and consciousness with divine will. But it's not that we become effaced. It's not that we lose everything that makes us unique. We actually subsume, like the divine moves through us
We
as
integrate it.
us, integrated as us. And so what we see through our lens and our perspective and our portal actually supersedes any text that had gone before, because it's the right information for this time in this context. As we all know, if you give advice out of context, it could be pretty fucking useless. Sometimes it's universal, sometimes it's of the wrong time. And so this idea that you can always rewrite the Torah, rewrite the scripture, if you're able to step into your own highest divine consciousness as you, not just the divine somewhere neutral, but the divine as you, then you actually can deliver a message, which is why all of these messages, even if it is the same being or the same frequency, could seem quite different, because it was specifically filtered through the lens of that person at that time in that specific way.
But the information, of course, is going to be different because it's going to be serving and meeting the need of exactly the people and the place that he was.
I haven't seen it put that way before. I've heard, the whole channeling the divine thing many times, but the divine as you. Like, that's such a concise way of saying what I feel like a lot of people have been trying to get at. And the things we've looked at recently. They really found a good way to articulate that there. So props to them.
Yeah,
Occupying.
I fully agree. And, it kind of reminds me of the sixth Hermetic principle, which is cause and effect. That every cause has an effect and every effect has a cause. It's all
Everything
sort of
has
connected.
its cause and its effect. Chance is
Exactly.
but a name for law not recognized.
Exactly. And that's how I feel about
Big believer
randomness.
in that
I don't
one.
believe in randomness. Right? Randomness is just our inability to perceive God's patterned encryption.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's there.
Yeah.
I don't care what the number sequence is. I've always been able to find patterns in it if I really deeply look. But, we talked about this last time. What is randomness? It's just a boundary condition where our knowledge ends and our ignorance begins. And as we expand human consciousness, we push the boundary out further and further. And that expands probably at something like the speed of light. Interesting that the universe is expanding about that same speed too. Maybe it's just our consciousness.
Oh, and that goes to the first principle of Hermeticism.
Mentalism.
The
Okay,
principle
got it.
of mentalism. The all is mind, the universe is mental. I read this and I was like, no shit. And because I came to that conclusion after trying 3 times to write a book called Master Your Mind, Master Your
60,000
Life.
words.
60,000 words thrice. All still
Thrice.
all
Thrice majestus.
all stillborn
Mm-hmm.
because finally it had to bring me to the conclusion, hey, dummy, you can't separate the mind from anything else. So how are you going to master the mind? Like that's saying I might as well write a book, Master the Universe, and put a picture of fucking He-Man on the cover and make it a comic. Because I had no chance. And I kept running into that problem.
I just
would
want to
try
know
to
who
separate the
Skeletor
mi-
is.
Ooh, that's a good question. I think if we put that question out in the polls, we'd get a lot of similar answers probably.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I realized that and I was like, you have to define, whether you call it mind or whether you call it something else, you could call it love if you like, but I think mind is a good way for us to think about it. You have to define it all as the same substrate to actually understand it. So call it mind or call it something, but it is actually all the same substrate, really, of just different densities.
Now, there's a great quote by Max Planck, who was pretty much the mentor that made Einstein famous. Because Einstein, working as a patent clerk, needed somebody to sponsor him, right? Who was going to be well regarded in the academic community. And that was Max Planck. Max Planck is famous for many things, particularly in quantum physics. Now, he and Einstein didn't agree on everything. He was more of the mindset that the universe is based on mind. He said, there is no matter as such.
My phrase for this is consciousness first. Consciousness first. It is the foundational principle of our reality. Like scientists commonly say, how is it that life, that on this random speck in the universe, in our galaxy, how is it that life came to be for one, but then how did it spawn consciousness? I think they have the question all wrong. It's actually, how did consciousness spawn matter, and then how did matter spawn life, which then fed back into consciousness and into a undeniable representation of itself. So then maybe we're touching more into that now.
We must conclude that at the base of everything is really just a conscious mind. And when you think about it in those terms, you start to then realize, and that's why I've kind of come to the conclusion that we have a you and you have a you inverse around you,
Why did I get this in?
right? So all of it is a mental construct. We cannot separate. There is no such thing as true objective reality in the context that we all see the world through our own prism.
Yeah.
So that is what we believe to be objective. We all think that our perception of a thing is objective, but as we start to expand our awareness, we realize there's different ways of looking at the same things or circumstances. That's why we have a crime, and there are 30 eyewitnesses that have entirely different accounts of the exact same occurrence.
So this is something that I was, definitely hoping that we would get into, because the idea of the, perspectival nature of all of our perception is pretty much unquestionable. Nobody watches the same movie because you're watching it through your own lens and through your own eyes and your own associations and everything that's coming there. Nobody reads the same book. Nobody knows the same person. We're all living in our own multiverse within the universe, the one verse, which is our own perspective. However, that doesn't mean that everything is just a story and nothing is real necessarily. And I think that's the way that postmodernity has taken it, that everything's just a story, nothing's real, nothing matters. And one of the things that I've been really studying with Rabbi Gaffney is actually the correlation between, in the Kabbalist lineage, the goddess Shekinah and the Tao. And it's basically a set of first principles and first values, like the law. So if you read the Tao Te Ching, it says the Tao is older than God. I don't know what created it, but the Tao is older than God. And that is it's like the law that's underneath perspective itself. And that's why they're saying it's even, earlier than God. It's even older than God. Right?
And see, that's where I would place the 7 Hermetic principles.
And that's where this seems to be reaching
it's
for.
It's like the laws of the construct.
This is, so basically the Hermetic principles are getting to the Tao, or in another, so maybe, Lao Tzu was another iteration of this Hermes Trismegistus thought in just another way, and another mystic. Maybe Rumi was as well, who said, you're a not.
Okay. I got myself killed simply because I did not focus. And therefore forgot I had a mana shield. That deep thought stuff will get you. It'll take away from the gameplay, for sure.
A drop in the ocean, you're the ocean in a drop. Obviously, that's the principle of correspondence, spoken extremely poetically. But either way, people are accessing this particular type of wisdom, and it seems to be reaching for that thing, the first principles and first values of the entire everything, the all that ever is. And then all of the creations are built upon that stack.
Well, and I believe fundamentally that part of the struggle that we face right now as a people, as humanity, is we are still very much clinging to this anachronistic, I believe, notion of materialism. And this leads to reductionism. It leads to more and more confirmation bias of that reductionism and materialism. It's all stacked on itself. So this is one of the biggest challenges to this anachronistic, I believe, notion of materialism. And this leads to reductionism. It leads to more and more confirmation bias of that reductionism and materialism. It's all stacked on itself. So this is one of the biggest challenges relative to our educational system right now. That's becoming kind of an anachronism in our world today.
Well, it's not it's not only our education system, it's our medical system, it's our financial system, it's our every system. It's trying to reduce it to the smallest part that you can understand. Even using words to describe a thing is incredibly reductionist. If I say, hey, Robert, I'm reducing you to a symbol that can be placed in a name, and it means something bigger, but we sometimes forget that the word is just a placeholder that clumsily approximates something that would be impossible to actually describe.
And this is one of the reasons I reject the notion of being titled in one area. Because as soon as you say, oh, someone will ask you, on the way over here in the Uber driver asked me, he goes, so what are you doing here? I said, I'm doing a podcast with Aubrey Marcus. And then he goes, oh, okay, are you going to need a ride back later this afternoon or whatever? And I said, probably. I got another podcast with Danica Patrick. And he's like, what do you do? He goes, what's your expertise? And I'm like, okay, now I'm all of a sudden feeling this like gravitational pull towards just to come up with a convenient answer.
Give him a something he can hang on to so he can quickly understand and then dismiss.
Which is more narrow, right? More narrow than what I actually am.
Do you think we crave that because there's a discomfort when we don't understand something and there's dissonance? Like, so the discomfort comes, why? What is he doing that allows him to get this? There's a little bit of discomfort, and then if they get something that they can just slide in, then the discomfort stops, and they're like, everything makes sense.
Because we all feel comfortable when we can categorize something.
Yeah, totally.
Right? It's like, okay, he's a policeman. I
Lightning
know
versus
how
now.
policemen think now, but he's not going to talk to me about anything outside of police stuff that I'm going to listen to.
Yeah.
I can then sort of shut it down. And we all do this. When we see a circumstance or event, doesn't matter what it is, we want to categorize it that fast.
Yeah.
And by categorizing it too quickly, we keep ourselves stuck in this world of judgment rather than just pure observation. And we can learn a lot more by looking at things, taking a moment and saying, without being so quick to judge it, saying, okay, let me see what the other ways to look at this are, because maybe the only true objective truth would be a mathematical equation. It's a mathematical equation which is the sum of all perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
So what I try to do now is I try to look at things through other lenses that would be juxtaposed to my own, even if I don't feel like I could agree with it right away. I want to try to do that so that I can step into another person's consciousness, another person's shoes. And in a way, I think that in and of itself, if we can strive for looking at things that way, then that helps us to find forgiveness. It helps us to find empathy. It helps us, to look at the world probably the way that maybe God would look at the world.
And if that all sounds too highbrow for you and you're like, not interested, it'll make you a better lover. Mm-hmm. It'll make you a better leader.
Better
It'll
listener.
make you a better friend. Mm-hmm. Are these things you care about? Being a lover, a leader, and a friend? Well, then these principles are important. The ability to step inside the inside of somebody else's experience and not keep your safe distance. And it's really vulnerable when you do that because you're subject to feel what they feel and experience what they experience.
100%.
And so
It's also harder to deal with people that are treating you poorly when you relate to them and can understand why they're doing what they're doing. Because what judgment allows you to do is it allows you to take a defensive position. Once you judge somebody as being hateful or being ignorant or whatever reason you come up for why they're against you, well then they're negative and you don't have to really account for them so much. You just have to account for how you're going to deal with them. But if you decide to really put yourself in their shoes and understand why they're doing what they're doing, it takes away that defensive position. Takes away your ability to just dismiss their negative. Doesn't mean that they necessarily are right, but it means that you have to be way more nuanced and way more careful and way more forgiving how you deal with people. And that's difficult and painful. I mean, you're gonna sympathize with them. They usually, if they're doing something really negative against you, they're probably coming from a place of pain themselves. So you're gonna have to feel their pain while you're already feeling your own pain. And then on top of that, the third layer of pain of having to balance those two pains in a simplistic manner, in a nuanced manner. So all that comes together in such a harsh way to make it very difficult for people to embrace that, to really let themselves get inside someone else's head and try to see it from their perspective whenever there's conflict. Makes it very tough, but it's so rewarding to do so. It really is.
So it's obviously you need to choose those people you do it with, wisely, or do it from afar. You obviously don't want to go step into anybody who's sniffing spray paint on the street corner or whatever. Like that might be.
I don't need to step into every shoe, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, you want to be able to imagine it, just not actually
That's right,
step into it. But nonetheless, it's still important to step in there so you don't have that judgment when he's talking to or she's talking to himself or herself. Mm-hmm. And it's such a valuable skill. And then it's an even more important skill when you actually have somebody that you love and you trust and is in your inner circle, your tribe, and then you can step into each other's experience. And that is what solves the great problem of loneliness, because you'll see yourself as a mirror in that person that you're stepping inside.
And that's the you inverse.
Yep.
That's the U inverse. So when you realize that the universe is mental, and there's a reason why the first of the Hermetic principles is mentalism. It's so core to understanding all the rest. Each stacks on each other. And when you realize that, then you start realizing that every experience that you have is not just happening to you, it's actually happening for you. Whether you're conscious of it or not is up to you. You may not be aware of it until later on. And we just think that the world's happening to us. Oh my gosh, something bad happened. Oh, life is difficult. Woe is me. I'm a victim, blah, blah, blah.
Well,
or you
yeah.
can look at it differently and say, what is my U inverse or my subconscious mind, the lens through which I'm seeing the world, trying to teach me, my higher self, trying to project back to me so that I will come to that realization. You know, you could go to school for years and years and years and study the didactics, but until you experience it in some sort of a role play that you believe is actually real, you haven't really fully learned it. And so often people will say, well, what does all this stuff mean? You know, how does this help or save the whales? Or how does this save deforestation or whatever? Well, if you actually study further into this, you'll realize that what we judge will just continue to be projected back to us. So in a way, when you start to really go down this rabbit hole of, okay, I'm going to be an advocate for this, that, or the other thing.
So, all right, this ties in exactly what I was just saying. Like, when you judge somebody, it gives you the power to kind of dismiss and take that defensive position. So, judging is inherently opposite of accepting. It's literally the exact opposite thing. And one of my favorite quotes, I can't remember who it's from at the moment, but one I repeat very often, is you cannot change anything you do not accept. It's exceedingly true. So every time you judge, I mean, you have to make judgments at some point in time. We're not God, we're not Jesus. You're gonna have to, use those crutches when you need them. But do so knowing that every time you judge, you are rejecting acceptance, which means you're not changing it, which means you're going to re-experience the same thing again. Because life works like anything that you do not accept is a battle you'll have to fight again. And what you do accept, you can then change, you can then adjust, you can adapt to, and then you don't have to fight that battle anymore. And I think it's an extremely potent thing to understand. Potent, useful, important thing. And once you can kind of internalize that understanding, it really changes like how you deal with life in general.
By your own judgments of those things.
Especially advocate against.
Yeah, exactly. You will only perpetuate those things. It's the hammer and nail situation. And that comes out of all of this, understanding of the Hermetic principles. And I think that's why it's so powerful for me. But one thing I want to mention also, when you asked who is Thoth and who is Hermes. Hermes, you can learn a lot about him also. So there's several books. Kybalion is one. It's excellent, by the Three Initiates. I love it. And you can listen to it on YouTube. It's fantastic. Around the same time, there was a translation that came out of the Emerald Tablets. So talking about the early 20th century. And in the early 20th century, there was kind of a bit of a mini renaissance that was happening. You saw a lot of advances in physics that was happening at that time. Right? You saw people like Walter Russell. They started creating societies of like polymathic thought, like the Twilight Club in New York City, that Walter Russell was a founder of. And I'm excited because I'm going to probably go and speak at his university in Virginia here in the next few weeks or so. But basically there was this small little mini kind of, I'd say, right around the turn of the century up until probably around, the crash in 1929. There was this really interesting time happening. It was kind of the roaring 20s, and there was a very different philosophy and thought. Art was also exploding at that time. And what you find during that period of time is that people were going through these sort of expansions. So you hear about also, leading up into that late 19th century, like Helena Blavatsky, excuse me, and Rudolf Steiner and other people that were kind of luminaries.
Hey, that is the first time that I've heard somebody ever bring up Rudolf Steiner. I've been feeling like I'm the only one who knows about this man's existence. And this guy just brought him up, man. Rudolf Steiner really had something serious in terms of being able to put the structure of things into an articulable form. And a very unique idea of what reality really was. One that I find highly engaging and very interested in. I continue to study him on a pretty regular basis. Madam he just brought up. Somebody that was kind of tertiary to him. Kind of part of his root story is really mostly how I look at her. This all ties into like the Rosicrucianism, Theosophy, that whole thing. Pretty odd turn in the philosophical journey of humanity. I want to try to get into that more sometime in the future, but I don't want to digress too far right now. For now, these guys are talking.
During this period of the world. And there was this expansion going on. So one of those things that came out of this was not only the work by the three initiates and the Kybalion, but also the Emerald Tablets of Thoth. Now, Emerald Tablets have been around for a long time, but there were different translations of it. This was a channel translation that was done by a guy by the name of Dorial. So I would definitely look into that because it tells a story also of Thoth, the Atlantean. So it goes all the way back in time and tells a story, and he actually claims in this writing that he built the pyramid. He was the designer of it. Now, it's funny because in Egyptian history, they tell the story of a guy by the name of Hemiunu. Hemiunu would have been the architect for the Great Pyramid. But Hemiunu sounds a lot like Hermiunu, right? It could definitely be some sort of connection between the two. And when you get into that, you can learn the whole story about how Atlantis fell, and then how civilization was maintained, how they moved to Kem, the land of Kem, Egypt.
Which is where, if people have listened to my podcast, Matthias DeStefano remembers life he lived as a woman with a child and sings the songs, and it's pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
And he tells stories of Thoth as a being, as a being in the flesh, not just a deity that's a aggregation of energy that people are worshiping, but no, it was a being.
Yeah, and he was sort of like, you could think of him as the king of the land also for thousands of years, in fact. And so, depending on which historical timeline you kind of like prescribe to, one of them is the pyramids are something on the order more of about 13,000 years old. Some are even older still. That it was before the Yunga Dryas, and we had like some major calamity that happened, around after that time. Also, the flood kind of plays into this. But basically, that story is worth reading. It's worth going through. There's something about it where we all kind of have this ability to know if something is worth listening to or reading. And as the words permeate into your consciousness, there's something very powerful about that particular book. It's fascinating. And it's written in a very prose kind of way. So it's beautifully written. It feels like scripture in a way. It's got this kind of holy feeling to it. And I probably read it and listened to it at least 200 times.
Wow.
And every time I listen to it or read it, I get something entirely new from it. It's there's something very powerful about it. Same thing with Kybalion. Kybalion's another good example. The Hermeticum is also another one that is worth reading. It's a short book, and it's a reiteration of a lot of these principles that have been passed down generation after generation, sometimes through sort of hidden secret society type stuff. It's hidden so that it can be found.
So if we do our job, you'll both not need to read these books and be even more excited to read these books.
Yes, that's right.
So that's what we're here to do.
So this podcast and pretty much everything I do is made possible by Onnit. And the great thing about Onnit is it's a company where I created all of the best products that would support me in a holistic life, physically, mentally, through all of the human optimization technologies that Onnit offers and is available And this ranges from kettlebells to the steel clubs, the steel maces, to the Alpha Brain, which I use before every podcast, and the Shroom Tech, which I use before every workout, and the Total NO that I use when I want to flex in the gym and have a really good workout. Really, everything that I've ever wanted from a human optimization standpoint is offered through Onnit. So I encourage you guys to check it out. Go to onnit.com/Aubrey and you'll save 10% off absolutely everything. And thank you for your support of Onnit, which is directly support to me. Thanks, fam.
So let me go through a couple of these different notes that I had. The first note, this is a quote from the Kabbalion. The principles of truth are 7. He who knows these understandingly possesses the magic key before whose touch all the doors of the temple fly open. The key. So these are that's exactly what these have been. These have been keys for me to start unlocking these different rooms in my psyche. Like if I can use this key correctly, and we'll talk about some of the ways that I've used these keys already, but I know I'm just now getting on the journey. But when you were talking about the principle of mentalism, this one key, the all is mind, the universe is mental, what you were previously saying about how things that you're projecting out into the world are reflected back to you. Well, if you think of it as all one mind, then of course that's going to be the way that it's going for. And of course, also the other thing that you can look at with this key is if it is all one mind, everything is happening in right reason and right accord, right? Like whatever is going on, we may not be able to understand it from our perspective, but from the largest mental perspective, it may make perfect sense. And Matthias talks about this a lot. For part of the necessity of creation, of course, is polarity. We'll talk about the principle of polarity. But part of polarity requires distortion, and distortion is a force that prevents us from seeing everything as same. Seeing everything as all as one. Distortion comes in and says, "Oh, I am separate," and it's also been called Maya, the illusion. There's a lot of ways that you can look at this, but some way in which we're not seeing the absolute truth, because if we saw the absolute truth, it'd be one note, one color, one sound, we would see beyond all of the differentiation.
We wouldn't get to experience our own differentiation.
Exactly. So within that, you start to understand, maybe this is all just a part of the symphony. And right now we could be in a part of the song that's like the deep, low, strident, viola part that's kind of building the intensity to anxiety. That's okay. It's all part of a big, grander symphony. And co-creatively, we're the conductors deciding how this orchestra goes.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I remember I was invited to go. I met Deepak Chopra in 2014, and he came to my office, and I wrote up on the board, on the whiteboard, the symbol, the Om symbol, and I said, "You know what this actually also means?" And he was like, "What?" I go, "It's 3, 6, 9, and the 9 is backwards because this is the way the Sanskrit so basically would write." And then you've got like this, looks like an I at the top with a dot in the center, and that's one of the ways to write the number 6. So 3, 6, 9. And he said, wow. He was like kind of blown away by that. And I said, Nikola Tesla talks about this. And he goes, how would Tesla know about this? And I said, well, because his guru was Swami Vivekananda. He was a famous Swami, it was kind of like a Yogananda level guy in the late 19th century, early 20th century. He came to the United States and taught, and Tesla was, a devout of that person. He was definitely someone who followed him very closely. And so he invited me. He said, you need to come with me. He took me in, we were in a big meeting with a lot of people around. He goes, took me in this other room. He goes, you need to come with me to Kerala. You come with me to Kerala. It's in southern India. And there's a big temple there, like a very old temple with these 2 snakes on the doors. It's like super famous. There's supposed to be a Vimana in the base of it and everything. I was like, okay, this sounds really cool. So he invites me to go. And the last second, I unfortunately couldn't go because I had a board meeting got called. Mm-hmm. And I was going through a major crisis at the time. It was a difficult situation. So I called him up and I said, I unfortunately can't make it. And he said, don't worry, Robert. Everything is as it should be. And I didn't really know what that meant, because in that moment in time, I was still thinking that, no, we make the world happen. right? Whatever it is that we do, we can kind of like either let it happen to us or we make it happen. I didn't realize at that time that I now believe very strongly that everything is connected.
And both are true. And this is the hard part, is that we have to be able to embrace paradox
Exactly.
to understand any aspect of the universe. Yeah, you got
So extremely true. So it ties into like you touched on the polarity aspect a bit. So the polarity being that basically there's everything has its opposite. There's two poles to all of the spectrum, kind of thing. So the thing with that is, if you look at that on like a universal sense, that means that everything is paradoxical. Because you have everything that is directly contradicted by its opposite. And if everything is actually all one interconnected thing, then you're going to have something and its opposite be the same thing. Which inherently is a paradox. So, the natural tendency for our mind to take a paradox as being untrue or false or unreal is something you have to kind of get past if you want to look at universal principles and look at things in the sense of all things.
to make it happen. And the universe is making you happen. And you're making it happen. And the universe is making you happen. And everything else around you happen.
Because it's all mind.
right.
And that's how it can work. When you think about it, I'll give you another example. It's pretty funny. I was on Instagram, and I see this post from this gentleman page or whatever that I follow, and this guy had like a neck brace on, and this pretty girl walks down the street right by him, and he like jerks his neck to look at her. He's like, "Oh, that hurt," right, like this, and then another one walks by this way. He does it again. He's like, "Oh, it hurts," and it says that men will be men, type of thing. And I was just laughing about this, and not 30 minutes later, I get on a conference call with my attorneys to work on some licensing agreement on patents. And our attorney gets on, and he's got a big-ass neck brace on. Right? And I was like thinking, I've never had a call with lawyers where there was a guy with a neck brace, and I just saw this like 10 minutes ago. Is this another form of mentalism? Right? Where the things that we are seeing and registering consciously are starting to become manifested in the world around us very rapidly through synchronicities. And it's another pattern of connection.
And of course, obviously, you're not saying that you looking at that post caused the guy's neck to break, right?
No, but
what you're saying is that there's a correlation at a plane of causation that's far higher and far beyond
Yes.
what we even understand, and it puts something in motion, which created a spray paint effect of this kind of splatter gun of like, okay, now neck brace is going to enter this aspect of consciousness, right? And it's again, this would go back to this principle of cause and effect. Chance is but a name for law not recognized.
Yeah.
So what you're suggesting is part of that principle of cause and effect that, all right,
It's funny that I just said level up too, because the synchronicity thing actually ties deeply into like if you kind of hit a new level in life, and when you do so, often you hit multiple new levels. When you do, you often experience more synchronicity. So he's going over synchronicity right now. I just hit a level up, a shadow level up, like he's right in the middle of it. That is in itself a synchronicity. So that's actually really cool. Oh, crap.
yeah, that's chance. Right now, as far as we know, it's chance. But there may be a law that we're not recognizing at a plane that we don't have access to.
I don't
right,
believe in
right.
coincidences. I used to. When I was very much a materialistic thinker, I believed in coincidences. Now I don't believe in coincidences at all, because I've had way too many examples where I had thought previously something was coincidence, and I realized later that it was all part of a macro pattern that was just too large for me to see from my zoomed in, too close to the tree to see the forest perspective. As soon as you zoom out and start looking at things from a larger standpoint, then those patterns start to become more visible to the naked eye. And you start realizing I'm learning something through this. And it's a beautiful process. Just now that you've read Kybalion, I'm sure that if you haven't yet, you will soon start experiencing more synchronicities. And this is one of the things that Carl Jung talks about. The surest sign of the path to enlightenment, or what he called the individuation process, is the number of synchronicities you start to register and experience in your day-to-day life.
Yeah, I just had one right before you came. So we had an old Onnit employee that I knew, but I knew him in the Onnit context, and he really got this urge to connect to me and really show me like what he was all about. Mm-hmm. And he loves playing different tabletop games like Pokemon, Digimon, and he didn't know that I was an old school Magic the Gathering player and like went deep into that world. So I shared that with him. He's like, oh man. And he got real excited. He's like, I'm going to make some things for you. He made this awesome gift box that was hilarious and has watercolors, and it had one very special Magic the Gathering pack. It was a pack that was in an entire giant box. So you know that the pack was like full of all ultra rare cards, right?
Wow.
It's cool. What a fucking gift. I haven't opened up a booster pack in a fucking long time too. So I open it up, and the premium card in the whole deck, so there's the rares and then there's the super rares, is a card that's something, I forget his name, but it's the Astral Dragon. Now, if you know, I just released a documentary called Dragon of the Jungle, which is literally about an astral dragon, which has been since that, and that released a week ago. Mm-hmm. And it's also been a way that I've been experiencing, consciousness through the lens of this mythical creature, a being of power, and trying to connect to the astral dragon kind of energy.
Another synchronicity.
And exactly, that's what I'm saying. Like, a dragon, sure, it's Magic the Gathering. There's dragons all over the place. An astral dragon as the rare card in the one pack that I got, coincidence or
crazy.
This is like just a wink from the divine, being like, there you go, boy. Like, make sure you're paying attention.
There you go, what?
So I'll give you another wink
I like that.
tied to the astral dragon. So on April 23rd and 24th, I spent the night in the Great Pyramid. This a couple months ago, 3 months ago. And it was the holiest night of the year. It was Ramadan. The pyramids are closed during the day. I was supposed to be there with a CEO of a major network, kind of a television network thing, and he couldn't make it last second. So I said, well, I'll just go to the pyramid by myself. So I went in, and I spent like 4 hours in the pyramid by myself. And while I was in there, I looked at the wall. And I'd already found, my wife, Susie, actually found the bull and the cow that was on the wall that matched the one on the Last Supper painting on the right side. But above the bull and the cow, I'd always seen this writing. There was always writing, and I kept seeing writing up there, and it was kind of like this swooshy kind of a shape, like a sine, cosine wave. This time I went in there, I noticed I could see the pattern. It's a dragon. In fact, it wasn't one dragon, it's three. 3 dragons, and they're attached to a tree. Now, you may have seen when the Queen had her Diamond Jubilee thing recently.
What queen? I didn't.
Queen of England. Queen of England. She lit up this. It was very bizarre. It's like there was this globe on this, like the royal pillow, and the globe. And so she goes and pushes on the globe, and all of a sudden these lights go in the shape of 3-strand DNA. And then they connect to like a tree of life and light up the tree of life. And I was like, that was a month after I found that on the wall inside the King's Chamber. I haven't even released this or the photographs of it anywhere yet. But this dragon has been all about Kundalini, and the third dragon, which is the Sheen, right? It's what happens through the staff of Hermes, right? You get into one mind, and it's no longer yin yang. It's now yin shen yang.
Yeah, it's the line in between the yin and the yang.
Right. So you talk about Shekinah, right? It's relative to that.
Yeah.
And so this whole thing, you mentioned the dragon. When I was at your conference, I bought a ring. Because they had vendors there. It was like, I felt like I was at Woodstock or something.
It was pretty awesome.
It was
Arcadia,
pretty epic,
yeah.
right?
Robert spoke at Arcadia.
Yeah. And I saw this ring there, and so I put on this ring, and it was like made of copper. And so I was like, okay, I like the look of copper. Cool. And it's a dragon, right? And so this dragon energy, the astral dragon energy, has been very much of very high meaning to me for the last 2-3 months. So the fact that you just released your thing on this, right? That's how I would look at this now, is I would say, okay, you telling me that story is another synchronicity. right? So it builds on even the synchronicity you have, and then it might serve for you to be a synchronicity. When we realize that it's all mind, we're all one.
Yeah.
And we're all collectively connected through this consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you get past that notion, because it takes a lot to break away from materialism to get into mentalism. But once you do, then you can go into correspondence.
Mm.
And that's the second, right? This is the second principle of, kind of the 7 Hermetic principles. And correspondence is embodied in the statement, as above, so below. What does that mean? I think the first place that I started to recognize that was before I even really knew much about any of this. I started to study fractal geometry. And what does fractal geometry even mean? So if you were to zoom in on a EKG of your...
So what he's about to get into, as above, so below, and I can see how it ties into the fractal geometry thing. So, but very simply, everything that happens on the big scale, so like if you start looking at like the movement of the galaxies and whatnot, and then you look at everything that happens on the small scale, what happens, atoms, subatomic particles, you see a lot of similarities. Not just similarities, like you see reflections of each other. You see them behaving in the same manner. So if you zoom out maximally far and zoom out maximally in, you're going to see basically the same thing. And with the fractals deal, it ties into how the evolutionary process works. He's probably going to get into it, so I won't dive into that too deeply. But the big point with the as above, so below thing, what it really means in a philosophical or spiritual sense, is that you yourself are a microcosm of the universe. And what is going on outside of you is not separate from what is going on inside of you. I'm still working on a better way to articulate this. These things are very hard to articulate. But yeah, that's what he's about to touch on. Hopefully he does a better job than me.
Heart wave, right? So you've got a QRS complex and a T wave, QRS complex and a T wave. It's kind of interesting because if you zoom in further into the parts that look totally flatline, so you've got this wave that goes like this, up and down, then you've got a T wave, and then it goes up again. This is called the QRS complex, and then it goes like this. We've all seen what an EKG thing looks like. But if you zoom in on the dead space in between, keep zooming in, you'll see the same wave again as a fractal form, a smaller form of it.
And I suppose one of the limitations is, maybe they don't do this anymore, but you used to see those with ink. They would have a little machine that would be writing it out. But now that it's digital, it just depends on how sensitive the equipment is to actually be able to register. It could probably go all the way up and all the way down, registering all the way. So if you even zoomed in like the Mandelbrot,
the Mandelbrot set. That's
like
exactly what
Mandelbrot
fractal
set.
geometry is.
And so even if you looked into the EKG, it would be little patterns upon patterns upon patterns, and you could just keep zooming in. Obviously, we don't have instruments that are sensitive enough to detect that.
They're starting to build
them.
them.
But they will, and ultimately I think that's when we'll start to show this principle of correspondence in a lot easier way. And also we have James Webb Telescope looking out farther and farther, and I don't know how useful it is right now at this stage, but it's pretty cool.
Right. Yeah, it's very cool.
It's very cool.
You can see the cool nebula and stuff. I mean, it's like super clear photographs and everything that we've never been able to see before. It's not a coincidence now that we're now able to observe what it looks like to see a black hole, right? As of a couple of years ago. And when that photograph got released on the internet of that, I can't remember her name, the woman who basically was doing the research and caught a photograph of a black hole. We're finding, again, we're pushing that boundary of ignorance farther and farther out, right? We still don't understand what is dark matter, what is dark energy. And as we start to understand this dark matter, dark energy, maybe this is really just an analog for the own aspects of our own subconscious mind we are yet to become consciously aware of.
Thinking out loud, I haven't really thought about this till now, but is it possible that dark energy and dark matter, and again, my astrophysics and quantum physics is very amateur, but could it be possible that is actually a window into the Tao, the All, the Shekinah. And like that's actually, we're looking at the void, and the void has a form because the form is the first values and first principles of the Tao, of the Shekinah, of the Hermetic principles. And we're actually seeing some kind of representation come through the blackness. So it's not nothing. And that's what we're saying. It's not
Oh, it's
nothing.
definitely not nothing.
It's not nothing. It seems like nothing, but if you actually really look, there would be an encoding in the nothing. And the encoding is that thing that was older than God.
Yeah, and maybe it's all about our own mindset.
And there's probably some physicists like, dummy, that's a terrible idea.
No,
but maybe not.
No, I think it's 100% correct. I
right,
actually,
pause
I
real
mean,
quick.
look, you got physicists.
Hold on, I gotta step away for a couple of minutes. I will be right back. right. Let's get back into it. I'm gonna rewind him a little bit.
Is, older than God.
Yeah, and maybe it's all about our own mindset.
And there's probably some physicists like, dummy, that's a terrible idea.
No,
but maybe not.
No, I think it's 100% correct. I actually, I mean, look, you got physicists. In 2012, they discover the Higgs boson, right? And they co-name that the God particle. I think there's, amongst large circles within some of the physics community, as you continue to go further and further into this, I mean, we could go down this reductionistic path and just realize that every time we look for something, whatever we're looking for, we will find.
Yeah.
Right. So
the observer effect.
Let's find it. Exactly. Let's find it's Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, whatever you expect. What we get in this world is not necessarily what we deserve in life. It's what we expected that we were going to get. Whether you expected it consciously or you expected it subconsciously, and that manifested in anxiety, you are creating the living circumstance that we have on a day-to-day basis. Now, what happens is you start looking at an atom, and the way Max Planck described an atom.
Before we go further, I just want to keep people out of like a dangerous rabbit hole of that. That doesn't mean that the woman that gets raped called forth the rape from her own. There are agents that can act and usurp another person's will and usurp another person's attraction and projection and actually force them to participate in their own attraction, projection, internal game. What you're talking about is the internal landscape.
Yeah.
And
how you perceive it.
And often that correlates to something external because you'll find it, you'll search it, you'll look for it, you'll notice it, you'll follow that path, you'll draw it to you. But however, it is a principle that absolutely applies to your internal landscape.
90% of what happens to us is not actually what happens to us. It's what we believed happened to us.
Right.
And again, that's getting to that mental space of it's a mental universe. So what can I learn from this experience? Why am I projecting this experience? Or why am I seeing it through this prism? What is it that I can learn from this? So in that context, every person you meet, you can learn something from. Every circumstance that comes up, you could find a synchronicity in it or not. It's up to you.
There's something that comes to mind when I'm talking about this, and it is very much a hermetic principle of alchemy. Mm-hmm. This being able to turn lead into gold. And this is a mechanism of perception, not actually having anything to do with metals on the periodic table, although many people have tried in a foolhardy approach.
It's symbolic.
It's symbolic. And one of the great stories of this is the Taoist, I think she was Taoist tantric teacher, and kind of like the I don't know, in some ways the founder of this kind of school of thought, Yeshe Sogyo, and Jamie Wheel talks about it in his book, Recapture the Rapture. She's traveling alone on one of those, call it the King's Road, if you watch, watch Game of Thrones, right? On King's Road, dangerous place. Mm-hmm. Some brigands find her on King's Road, and they go to rape her. And she was in such a state of consciousness that actually she saw not the rape that was occurring, but she saw the pain and the sorrow and the trauma and the sadness that was in each of these men. And she held in the frequency of seeing that. Mm-hmm. And the men actually carried through. They were in the heat of their passions, and they're in their full, bloodlust and violence, carried through with the quote rape, which of course it was, and it was, and this is the paradox, but she didn't see it as that. And because she didn't see it as that, when they finished and just saw them as the humans, the flawed, broken humans in pain that were reaching out, to try to claim some power, and she saw something different, and they broke down in tears. This is the story. And they broke down in tears, and then they all devoted that we will protect you and fight for you for the rest of our life to make up for what we have done, because you've showed us the truth of who we really are, and beneath this, and showed us something different in this world. And so that, and in the story, it's like she didn't record, the violence aspect of it. She recorded something different, and they recorded something different, and then it shifted the timeline radically for her, for those men, and then for the world, from that act of alchemy. Now, I'm not saying that everybody should be able to do this, blah, blah, blah. This is not like a should game, but this is showing the alchemical principle, the possibility.
And it's a divine aspect, because I think another good example of what you're describing is, how Christ took being crucified.
Yeah.
Right. The whole thing.
It's a Stoic principle. It's the whole thing.
Yeah. It's like, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. He's probably going into their consciousness in the same way that this woman did, and seeing the broken, and finding within his own suffering, right? He was still had total power over how he was going to perceive and how he was going to experience this horrific experience. And to me, that is a personification of the divine. And being able to see the world that way. I did a podcast recently in LA with Amber Khan, who I love dearly. She's awesome. And she's a follower of Islam. And she started asking me, she said, well, what about, because she knows I take more of a Buddhistic approach on duality, right? And she's like, yeah, but what about all these people that do these really heinous, horrible things, right? And how do you perceive that? And so I stood my ground. It was an interesting conversation. But at the end of it, she started talking to someone else in the crowd who said, I don't feel good enough. I don't feel good enough, and I feel like I've sinned so much in life. I've done so much stuff wrong. God could never possibly love me. And her response was, in the Quran, it says that God loves you 40,000 times more than, I love how they love to put a mathematical number to it. Why 40,000? 40,000 times more than your mother. And he doesn't see you for the sin. He sees you for the person. It's like, abhor the sin, but love the sinner. And she could look at it in that context.
You can hate the war, but love the soldier.
Exactly. She saw it in that context, looking at it in the eyes of God. And so then I, said, what you just described explains how I feel about non-duality, which is, it's not that I condone the horrible, abhorrent act. I don't condone it. I don't want to see those things happen in the world. But at the same time, I realize that all of us are human beings. We all are imperfect. We all are making mistakes. And at the end of the day, everybody that claims to be only good is not only good.
Bullshit.
Right. The only people we should be probably concerned about are the people that claim to be only good, because that is narcissism. Right. It's the people that know that, as Alan Watts says, they're rascals at their core.
Yeah.
Right. It's like the people that don't know that they're a rascal at their core. Those are the ones that still haven't yet discovered what the darkness is. What is dark matter? What is dark energy? Maybe it's just the things that we don't want to allow to even be in our consciousness.
Yeah, and that aspect of distortion that I was talking about. Distortion is a force, and you could personify that force, and it's been called many names: the beast, the antichrist. Antichrist is an interesting word I've been playing with. I want to touch on one thing. So if we say Melchizedek is in the frequency of Hermes, in the frequency of Hermetic teachings, one of the quotes that I pulled out of a recent book from Paul Selig is, how you change the world is by how you see the world, right? So and this is exactly what Yeshit Tzogyal demonstrated, is by her act of seeing the world differently, the world actually changed. Her world changed. She recorded something different. Viktor Frankl did something different, something similar in Auschwitz, like people making these incredibly wild and radical perspective changes that seem impossibly divine, and you do that and it actually changes the world. And this was really kind of the guiding principle behind Arcadia, that festival we threw, is like, let's see the more beautiful world and let's bring it into form now. What
an epic place that room was, too.
I know, it was unbelievable.
That was so cool.
It was unbelievable.
Talk about feeling like you're in a 5D kind of a world. I mean, really well done on that. That was really cool. But you're right. I think it comes down to, you want to change your world, start by changing your perspective on the world.
Yeah.
Start to try to see a different way of seeing it than you've seen it before.
Try to kill me.
Because seeing it the same way over and over again and you're not happy, some might call it delusional. I don't. I actually call it ascended. If you can start to see the world in the context that you would like to see the world, then the world will start to reflect more of that back to you. It's a mathematical equation. And another person that I think would be tied to Thoth and Hermes would be Metatron. So it's just the angelic form, and you've probably heard of the 72 names of God, right? So Metatron is known also in the non-canonized books of the Bible as being kind of like the highest of the archangels, right? And there's some connection as well. Sometimes people refer to Metatron as the lesser Yahweh, right? Yahweh being the name of God, right? And it's kind of interesting because there seems to be this connection also between Metatron, angelic representation, Thoth, Hermetic principles, geometry.
Yeah. And if we're right here, haven't gone too far past the second principle, the principle of correspondence. The one note that I have here from the Kabbalion is, in studying the monad, which is the divine spark that we hold inside, you understand the archangel. As within, so without. So as above, so below. So actually, if we want to understand Metatron, and if we want to understand all of these angelic beings, look inside yourself and you'll find it. Also, if you want to find and understand the demonic beings,
look inside yourself.
Look inside yourself.
And be willing to confront it.
And this has been a big part of my journey.
Integrate.
Actually, it started in Arcadia. I did a ketamine cannabis journey to prepare myself for this big week ahead. And it was a very surprising journey because it showed me, and this is skipping ahead a little bit to the principle of polarity, which we'll get to, but it showed that I'm choosing to embody a particular type of polarity upon the spectrum, but I'm the entire pole. I'm the whole pole. And what it showed me was the opposite polarity of what I'm choosing to express that right now. The vision that it gave me was a black hole with teeth. It was like full Shiva the Destroyer. I was just I was a monster. I was a monster. And I was like, holy shit, that's me too? A black hole with teeth? Like, it was like the fucking pit.
You're like Luke Skywalker going in the cave, dude.
It was intense, man. And that journey has continued of showing me all of the darkness that you could possibly imagine in the world, but showing it as me. And in that journey, it's deep and it's intense, and it causes a flinch, because it's one thing to look at the darkness and not flinch, see a shitty movie with some torture or something like that, and you want to kind of close your eyes and like turn your head and not look at it, of course. But then to see it as you, oh, that's a whole other fucking level. And in the ceremony space, if you try to look away, if you try to run from these different aspects, it's like a bear that's just going to chase you and start eating you asshole first. Like, it doesn't
sound good.
It doesn't care. It doesn't care. You can't run away from these different things, which is one of the reasons why I really have such deep reverence for the plant medicine path, is that, and the psychedelic
it reveals
medicine path.
things.
It reveals
to you.
things.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have a choice. You do have a choice, but the best choice is to surrender and see what it's actually trying to show you without trying to change it or without trying to flinch. And actually, in this process of seeing that opposite polarity, the anti-Aubrey, which is also the Aubrey, the Christ and the Antichrist are also like transposed, and we'll get into that in principal polarity. By seeing the anti-Aubrey, it actually made me, in a way, more Aubrey, because then I realized that I was choosing to be Aubrey. I just didn't come out of the fucking womb, boom, here I am, I'm Aubrey. No, I'm a full spectrum being, and I'm choosing this. And in choosing that, there was a strength. There was like, oh, I'm choosing this. And so I trusted myself. I trusted myself to be able to choose which polarity I wanted to express at just a little bit more from that journey. So just the deepest gratitude for actually embracing the entirety of my darkness, so that I'm now reinforcing my choice to participate in the light. And of course, also, I love talking shit. I love being a fucking rascal. I love all of these.
You're definitely a rascal.
Of course. Of course.
But I think you see that, and you do see that in yourself, which is what is so endearing, right? That to me is one of your greatest qualities, is that, and it's very Alan Watts in its field, right? Which is, Alan knows, he's like, he'll call out rascal stuff. He's like, I'm the worst rascal of all. Like, are you kidding me? He loves to joke, and he loves to like rib people, but that's just kind of who he is, and he's with that. He's good with that. And this is back to the individuation process Carl Jung is referencing. And that's what alchemy is all about. All Carl Jung did is he took alchemy and put it into words that would be fitting to the scientific community. Mm-hmm. What you're really talking about here is just shadow integration. And us understanding or not understanding dark matter, dark energy, to me, is just a larger metaphor for us starting to now understand.
Pause this. Why? What do you get out of this? Are you just hunting for fucking honor, easy honor? Is that what this is? So annoying, man. So freaking annoying. That might be all I have in me for the night, guys. That really might be all I have in me. I'm getting so sick of being haunted by Alliance. Like, I can't get anything done. Not being able to progress is not a good feeling. And people just don't care. They really don't. They give two shits about ruining someone else's experience. That really sucks. That really sucks. I don't know. I think I'm probably gonna end the stream, at least to take a freaking break. No, not to like worry about like having a stream that's just waiting on me to come back. Take a little bit of a break. There's a good chance I'll turn the stream back on. It'll be, I guess technically it's just separate VOD and everything. That'll be a little annoying, but I don't want to be beholden to a timetable right now. I think I need to just step away for a little bit. So that's probably what I'm gonna do. I think I'll keep this running while I get over to Hammerfall and get my Hearth point set up there. And then we'll continue to watch the video and whatever. And then yeah, I'm gonna get off and take a break probably. It is what it is.
Our shadow, collectively, it's all mind. Mm-hmm. When we look at it from that context, like everything shifts. Everything shifts. You look at Jesus. Okay, Jesus, what did he do? He just told everybody, judge not, right? Lest you judge yourself. Love God with all your heart, might, mind, and strength, right? Love your neighbor as yourself. That's really all he taught. You got the Beatitudes, a few other things, the meek shall inherit the word. But man, did he ever get attacked? Mm-hmm. He got attacked. So it's not about seeing things. I used to say that we see things from our own vantage point. Now I change that to say we see things from our own advantage point. Mm. This is our perspective. The thing that I think is going to benefit me is how I'm going to see whatever it is that I see. And until I can break away from that, I can never see the dark demon with the teeth that I am.
Right. Right.
And as soon as we start to see that, then the power that demon has over you diminishes dramatically. Because the more you try to repress it and say, no, it doesn't exist, it will just come out and, like you said, eat you asshole first.
Yep.
Every time. And you won't even know until it's already consumed a good portion of you.
Yeah.
And then you're like, how did this happen? I'm finding myself in the same situation again. I'm experiencing the same pattern over and over again. That's what Hermeticism is really about. It's not about looking at the world and saying, here's what's fucked up about the world around me. It's about looking at yourself and going within and saying, who am I? Who am I in my full spectrum? And then being able to be at one-ment with that, or atone to that way of thinking.
Yeah. It's just, this is making me think of the, and they have this, I think, in the recent printing of the Kabbalah, and at least, I don't know about the original, but they have a painting that by Michelangelo, which I think we talked about on our last podcast, which is, and you mentioned how God is showing up in a human brain, and you did a lot of cool geometry things with that. But I don't know if we necessarily touched on, or if I just didn't recall it, but how that was actually showing that the universe is mental, that actually God was inside a brain in the Sistine Chapel, and then reaching towards Adam. And if you look at Adam, he's kind of like lazily putting his finger up and kind of turning away, like
it's kind of bent like this.
Basically like, I know, God, I know, but I'm going to look away just enough that I can go play this game over here and live this experience of separation so that I can have maximum complexity creation, all of the different things. I don't want to look straight at you face to God and see all of the truth revealed, because then I'm not actually in polarity. I'm not actually having this experience. So man just kind of turns away and lazily says, yes, God, I see you. You're right there. All is mind. But I'm going to play this game for real, just like I play one-on-one basketball, like, I'm going and playing to the death.
Yeah,
You
like
know?
shuffleboard.
Hold
You
on.
crushed me. Thank you.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Like
Exactly.
it requires if we just
Let me
looked at
pause
if we
this.
just stared at each other.
What are you saying, guy? React to Hanger 18? I don't even know what you're trying to tell me, dude. You wanna elaborate? Wanna put that in some context I can understand? Because I'm not even like it's Hanger 18. What are you even talking about? I'm confused. I'm waiting. I'm waiting on you. No, nothing? We're just gonna make a random comment instructing me how I should stream, and then we're not gonna elaborate. Don't really actually have anything constructive to say. I'm gonna assume, I guess, you were probably trying to tell me that I need to react to the video more, maybe? I let enough context go so I can talk about it at length. And also, I'm into my stream right now. I'm letting the last bit of context build up before I make my last statements. There's a lot of depth going on here. This isn't just a ha 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 ha, let's laugh at that funny moment type of video. Kind of an off-putting comment, not gonna lie. But anyway,
When we're playing to the death.
Yeah,
You
like
know?
shuffleboard. You crushed me. Thank you.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. Like
Exactly.
it requires if we just stared at each other when we were playing shuffleboard right
Mhm.
before this, and I just looked at you and say, I see you, Robert, as
Yeah.
God, as me. Namaste.
Namaste.
And be like,
Now
why
I'm
are
gonna
we
win, motherfucker.
Why are we why are we even rolling these pucks in the first place? Of course, no, we just skipped I'm gonna win, motherfucker. That's
Right,
that's what made it fun.
That's
and that's
right.
why Adam is like, I see you, God, but and I think it's important to do both. It's important to be like, yes, God, I know. And me as Adam, I want to play like this. You know,
Yeah,
I want to
totally.
experience it like this.
No, this is what we're here for, to have this experience. There's another part of that pain.
so okay. That he's not quite done, but I'm gonna let that call at the end of that train of thought, because this actually does wrap it up pretty nicely. I was talking about earlier how. Hold on, let me get my words right really quickly. How acceptance is the opposite of judgment, and the more that you judge, the more you can deny yourself acceptance, and the more that you deny yourself acceptance, the more you deny your own ability to change and adapt to your environment and to be better. But everything exists as a set of polar opposite pairs, and that everything exists for a reason. And so here they kind of highlight the exact reason why we have that polar opposite of judgment in comparison to acceptance. Because acceptance, fully wide open, and I kind of mentioned this earlier too, but acceptance fully wide open, I mean, leaves you with the inability to act. If you just accept everything, then you have no real investment in anything. You cannot hierarchically structure your perspective of reality, then you cannot choose one thing over the other. That's the purpose of judgment inherently, is to say that this thing is better than this thing. So that's, I think, actually a beautiful point for us to go ahead and end on. They didn't quite get into the polarity thing, even though they touched on it a couple times. Like I said, I might be coming back a little bit later. We'll see how things go. I do need to take a break real quick, though. And it unspecified amount of time, probably at least 45 minutes. Either way, I will save this video for whenever I do stream next. It will be, if not later today, we'll be doing this 5 o'clock tomorrow at Eastern Standard Time. And if anybody's watching and has enjoyed it, hope to see you there. Either way, thanks for being here. Have a good day, and I'll catch y'all next time.